Hello, everyone. We're thrilled that you could join us today for our session, our place-based peer learning session on responding to online abuse. I'm Kate Parkin, Senior Officer on the Let's Create Peer Learning programme, and today from a place-based peer learning perspective. I'll be with you along with our two speakers today, John White, who will be hosting the session from the space, and Rowan Kerrick Robertson. And they will both take us through until about 3:30. The session today is recorded, so please feel free to share or watch afterwards. And it's accessible from next week via our platform, which is our Let's Create Peer Learning platform via the kind of resources section. For the purposes of audio description, I'm a middle-aged white woman with a brown fringe, fluorescent green glasses, so you should be able to spot me. If you have any questions or anything you'd like to add, please feel free to add it into the chat. We're also joined by Isabel and Naomi, who are our two BSL interpreters. They'll be with us throughout the whole session, the whole afternoon. Again, if you need them for any of the activities we have, please just let us know in the chat. And we have our captions on as well, so you can feel free to press that button to see the captions, live captions. And without further ado, I'll introduce you to John.
Thank you very much, Kate, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you guys. Lovely to see you all. I'm John White. I'm Chief Operating Officer of the space. I'm a middle-aged white man with short brown hair and a beard and round glasses, wearing a blue shirt. For those of you who haven't heard of us before, the space is a not-for-profit. It's one of Arts Council England's investment principal support organisations. Say that slowly. And our remit is to help artists and the cultural sector more broadly to engage with audiences using digital technology, predominantly online. But we also look at issues and barriers to doing that effectively. And sadly, in our current environment, one of those challenges is around organisations and individuals facing online abuse as they go about their jobs in the cultural sector. Rowan will introduce herself to you shortly, and I have been working on this area since 2019, supporting everything from large organisations like Historic Royal Palaces, National Portrait Gallery, the Mayor of London's office and their cultural ambassadors, through to small museums, galleries, and individuals working in the sector in kind of practical strategies and what we can do to prepare for the unfortunate eventuality of online abuse and to mitigate the consequences if it does happen. And we're going to take you today through some very practical approaches and techniques for doing that. The plan, as Kate mentioned, is that the session will finish at about 3:30. We'll aim to take a short 5-minute screen break roughly in the middle of the session. Copies of the slides that we're going to share, there's quite a lot of detail. We'll make those available at the end to be circulated. Do feel free, if you've got experience around this kind of thing, just to briefly describe in the chat. We don't want people necessarily going into the sort of level of detail that might be triggering for others, but if you've encountered issues, and particularly if you found useful challenges, then yeah, please do, useful solutions to those challenges, then please also share those. We're always interested to learn. So that's enough from me. I will pass to Rowan to introduce herself.
Hi there. I'm going to start by saying, Rona, I hope I've said your name correctly. I can see that you're asking us to speak slowly. So
yeah,
if I speak too fast, then please.
I didn't hear most of what John was saying because he was speaking too quickly. And the captions, when they actually tried to translate, didn't make that much sense because John was speaking too quickly. So I was waving frantically to speak because I put in the chat twice for him to slow down. And obviously he didn't see the chat. So I missed most of that introduction, I'm afraid, because I'm very hard of hearing.
Apologies, and I will try to speak more slowly and clearly for the rest of the presentation.
If I speak too fast, then please just give me a shout as I go through. So hello, everybody. It's great to be with you today. Thank you for your time. I'm Rowan Kerrick Robertson. So my audio description is a middle-aged white lady with slightly red hair and a green flowery top. I'm a social media consultant and producer. I'm the former head of social media for BBC Television. So as John said, I work with the space to help strengthen cultural organisations' support for their different teams in dealing with online abuse. Today, I'm going to talk about how to protect yourself from online abuse and hate, because sometimes our work or the activities of our partners may make us into unexpected targets, really. I want to start by saying that we know that everyone, so all of us on the call today, but also out there in the world in general, have had different experiences of online abuse. For some people, it isn't a considerable issue, but for others, it's very, very real, it's very intrusive, and it's very horrible. It can cause huge amounts of stress, upset, and worry if it happens to you, which is obviously why we're here today. If any of you have had this experience, I'm so sorry that this is the case. And I really hope that some of the things that I'm going to say today and that John's going to share about as well are able to help. If you're in the former camp, I encourage you to consider the actions that we're talking about today, so that if you do ever find yourself suffering online abuse, it doesn't come straight into your real life in what can be a devastating fashion sometimes. So in this session, I'm going to talk about how you can protect yourself from online harms, how you can plan to avoid the worst of online abuse. And John is going to talk about the different ways you can choose to respond if you do ever suffer from online hate, as well as thoughts which should be useful for your organisations in this area. We thought there's too many of us really on the call for us to get thoughts from everybody individually, but we'd love to get a sense of some of your experiences in this area. So we thought that we'd start by asking you a couple of questions to gauge your experiences of online harms through Zoom. You know, it will come up as a questionnaire. And then we can share with you shortly a sort of slightly wider view across the sector too. So let's start with our first question. Kate, my glamorous assistant, is going to put them up, I think. So yeah, it should be coming through now. There's just two questions. The first one, have you or your organisation been subject to online abuse in the last 12 months? Are on the call, so I don't know when they're going to be answered. But I'll read out the second question anyway. Does the risk of online abuse influence what content you post on social media?
So we've got a question, Rowan, in the chat from Helen. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, I did see it. I was just reading it and digesting it while it looks like everybody's answered. Helen said, sorry, I've got too many Zoom notifications. I have put yes, but not entirely sure what we're classing as abuse. I think for these purposes, if you felt like you were in some way abused or your organisation was some way abused, that's probably gives us the sort of information that we were kind of hoping to get. So just a sense of context. it looks like everybody, thank you. It looks like everybody has finished their answering of the question. So let's see.
I'll share the results. Yes.
Oh, yes, thanks. So you can see there, have you or your organisation been subject to online abuse in the last 12 months? So over half of you have said yes, 54% of you have said yes. And the second one is, does the risk of online abuse influence what content you post on social media? And that's a much bigger number. I'm going to take a photo of it so that I can reference it later easily while we're speaking. So far more of you, almost 80% of you, have said that the online abuse is affecting the content that you put up. John, Kate, have you got any other reflections at this point on those responses?
Personally, I knew the social media question would have a higher level. Very conscious of that, but I'm still really surprised that over half the people here on the call have been affected by online abuse professionally.
I would say, sadly, I'm not surprised by those numbers. You will see, Rowan will present a wider survey that we've done, and it's, you know, in broad line with those findings. And I think the very high proportion of people who are influenced in what they feel they can freely talk about online is also a very large concern, particularly in the cultural sector, where that ethos of free and varied expression is really important. So depressing, but sadly not surprising.
Thank you for your reflections. As I said, we've got some results of a survey that the space has done with similar questions. So you can see a kind of slightly broader picture very shortly in my slides. I am going to dive into my slides now, so bear with me while I bring them up to share with you. I'm hoping you've got them all there now. So this is our agenda. So we are going to be covering what is online abuse, people's experiences, that wider picture in the cultural sector in this area, a little bit about the law here in the UK. We're going to cover planning ahead. How can you plan to protect yourself and your organisation? We will have a pause for questions and also a few minutes comfort break in the middle. And then John is going to pick up on planning if you're in an organisation, protecting your staff, thinking about social media and risks, and also what to do if you receive abuse. And hopefully we should have time for questions at the end as well. So let's dive in. When you feature in online content, or you're part of a creative team that's putting it out for an organisation, or even if you're publicly associated with an organisation that posts on social media platforms and that people have opinions about, you're more likely to find yourself in the spotlight of attention. And when that happens on social media, you might receive positive comments about it, but we also know you might be challenged. And when we're challenged in a civil way, that's okay, isn't it? But not everyone responds as we would like in the virtual world. And you might also feel like you're at the receiving end of abusive or prejudiced comments. You might feel objectified. And we know that people in the spotlight do sometimes receive threats via social media, perhaps via their own social media accounts. And that is definitely not okay. What is not acceptable in our physical lives should not be acceptable online. All sorts of people receive online abuse, although sadly, we know that certain groups are more targeted than others, and that's people from underrepresented groups, including women, Black people and those from ethnic minorities, people who are LGBTQ+, disabled people, as well as children and teenagers. On screen, you can see just a few grabs of recent reports about the people who receive the most online abuse. But, of course, nobody is immune. As I said before, the space has actually done 2 surveys now, and we include them here to offer that slightly wider picture of how online abuse is affecting people working in the cultural sector. So the survey, the respondents were people working in arts and culture, and we asked about their experiences of online abuse. In the last 12 months, from a survey of 69 professionals who responded, the space found, as you can see on screen, 76% of respondents said that they or their organisation had received public criticism online. 67% of respondents said they or their organisation had had to delete or block abusive social media comments. 58% said they'd closed or shuttered specific social media accounts because of their abusive content. And 30% of respondents said dealing with online criticism or abuse because of their work had negatively affected their well-being. We also asked some other questions in that survey, and respondents told us that only 28% have out-of-hours monitoring and moderation of online comments, that only 25% have a documented process for staff to monitor and moderate online comments, that only 18% provide staff training in monitoring and moderating the online comments, and just 5% strongly agreed that their organisation can manage risks relating to online abuse. So we know that 50% of you said that you had, here's where the photo's useful, about 50% of you said that you had suffered some online abuse in the last 12 months. And nearly 80% of you said that you were affecting what you posted on social because of potential abuse. So this does chime with what other people have said. I thought it would be useful to briefly articulate some of the main types of online abuse. Apologies, it's a pretty dispiriting list. So online stalking is when there's persistent and frequent unwanted contact or interference in someone's life. Doxing, where your personal details, such as your home address, are shared publicly without your consent. Trolling, which is designed to antagonize other people online by deliberately posting inflammatory, irrelevant, or offensive comments or other disruptive content. So trolling is usually done by groups of people who want to silence others. It's kind of part of cancel culture, really, or it can be done just for their, let's say, amusement. Often it's when people deliberately start arguments so that other people aren't able to have their say, so they're silencing people that they don't want to have a public voice. Virtual mobbing is when a group form a campaign against an individual or another organisation or an organisation. There's also hacking, impersonation, and spamming. So these are the main types of online abuse. Sadly, we can't stop people behaving badly online. We aren't in a position to prevent racism or misogyny or other types of prejudice and hate speech. But that doesn't mean that we're powerless. What I'm going to talk about now is what we can actually do about it. What practical steps can we take? I'm keen to try and help people prevent online abuse from happening to them. And if it does, to stop it tipping over into something that significantly impacts their lives, as this can sadly happen. Legally speaking, in the UK, things which are illegal in real life are also illegal online. UK law does protect us against online abuse, but of course, it's like your physical life. The law doesn't prevent crimes from taking place. It acts as a deterrent and offers victims the possibility of recourse. Under UK law, it's an offence for a person to use threatening, abusive, or insulting words or behaviour that causes or is likely to cause another person harassment, alarm, or distress. And this law has been revised over the years to include language that is deemed to incite racial and religious hatred, as well as hatred on the grounds of sexual orientation. So actually, a lot of online abuse is breaking the law. The latest addition in this area, the Online Safety Act of 2023, I'm sure most of you, if not all, will have heard of it, not only strives to offer greater protection to children online, that is a big part of that law, it also provides 3 new layers of protection for all internet users in the UK by hopefully making sure illegal content is removed from the social platforms, making sure that the platforms enforce the promises that they make users sign up to when they start accounts, when you agree to the terms and conditions, and making sure users have the option to filter out content such as online abuse that they don't want to see. These new laws only started being enforced by Ofcom last summer, so we're still sort of watching this space to find out how effective the law and Ofcom will be in regard to making the platforms take care of people more in this area, especially given Meta's rollback on moderation policies that they announced last year, and Ofcom's decision more recently to start an investigation into the discovery that X's AI tool Grok was creating naked and sexualized images of unsuspecting people, particularly women. And that looks like an area where the law is going to be tightened relatively quickly, which is good. But Ofcom have started to hand out fines. Now we wait to see what happens when companies decide not to pay the fines. So it's an evolving area. But reporting illegal activity, like I've just been outlining, to the police usually only happens when things get quite extreme, and much online abuse doesn't warrant police attention and is something we can try and protect ourselves against. So let's look at the best way to protect ourselves from these various types of grim attack. I'm now going to invite you to think about your online security and where there may be possible chinks in your online armor, so to speak. Specifically, your online privacy, your levels of protection, and an understanding that you can plan to avoid emergencies from happening or reduce their impact considerably if they do. I think of this work like locking your house or your car. We'd all like to live in a world where you didn't have to do that, but actually it doesn't take much effort to lock the house and it prevents something horrible happening. If you can, the best idea is to do this sort of thinking and this work that I'm going to go through before anything very negative happens to you online, so that you'd be shielded from the worst abuses coming straight into your life if you were ever personally attacked. The best option is to safeguard our privacy as well as possible, and to control what we see on the platforms as well as what other people can see about us. I should stress that there are no right and wrong answers with this work. It's all about you deciding what sort of content you are happy seeing, or how much you're happy with other people seeing about you. It's about making sure your social media profiles are set to reflect your own comfort levels, and not just the default ones that the platforms kind of start accounts with, which is how lots of people kind of carry on for years. Let's go through the main sorts of settings available to us for our own accounts across the main social media platforms. You'll be pleased to hear I'm not going to go through every single platform, but this is a grab of different platforms, of different social platforms, where you might very well have a mix of posts or accounts that are about your personal life, your professional life, or both of those combined. So I invite you to go through the settings on the platforms that you use. Have a good look at the options and set the functions of the platforms to your preferences. I've popped these grabs here, which are the main platforms. The way that you get to your settings is always through your profile, and I've shown what to look for on the screen there with those red circles. So you go into settings, and the important sections are usually under security and privacy and safety, but also look in your notification settings too. On Instagram, they're a little bit more spread out into the sections, so have a good look through when you have time to do so. So these are the main sort of settings, the things to look out for, and the platforms have varying options around each of these different pieces of functionality. The first thing to do is go through the privacy settings for each of your social accounts and decide on all of the options that they offer. So it's going to be things like, can just anyone follow you? You may think yes on X, but you probably wouldn't want that on Facebook. Having a good idea of what you use your different accounts for may help you to make these decisions. So are you using it for work and want to be public? Or are you using it just for your personal life and maybe it doesn't need to be public? For me, I have a Facebook account totally locked down, so you can't even find me in a search. I just don't want strangers contacting me there. And I'm also private on Instagram because I post about my personal life, and I don't really want to reach out to new people there either. Another thing to think about is, can just anyone send you private messages? Or maybe you'll limit it to just people you follow, or perhaps nobody can send you a direct message. For me, I don't use X very much, but I do worry, I have an account there, but I do worry about X the most, and I only let my followers direct message me there. On LinkedIn though, I'm using that for work. I want to be more open, and I let anyone direct message me there. But I keep my contact details, such as my email address, visible only for my connections on LinkedIn. But I do know that I'm more relaxed on LinkedIn than I am on X. So if anything ever happened, I would go to LinkedIn and lock it all down in the first instance. You can also ask yourself, can everyone see all of the content that you post? You may want to limit it, so some of it isn't totally public. Instagram, for example, has the close friends functionality you can see on screen, which is where you select people who are your close friends, and only they can see the content that you post with that tagged. And it can be useful for sharing some of your posts just with a limited number of people, maybe people that you really know. You can also choose not to see low quality content on X, for example, which is a really good way of not seeing all the rubbish. And another useful setting on X is the same as Instagram's close friends, which is called protect your posts, which means only your followers can see posts that you select with that tag. Of course, it's worth remembering that everything can be screen grabbed online, so nothing is securely private, even if it's sent in a private message. I usually post things so that everyone who follows me can see them, but I have a private Instagram account, like I said, and on Facebook, sometimes I use that setting where only specific people can see my posts, just to make them more relevant, if I'm honest. Another area is whether other people can tag you in images. So image and content tags are a really easy way to expose people to hateful and highly offensive content placed into images, because tagging someone on a piece of content brings it into their notifications. It's sadly a very effective way to abuse people online. And attackers often create horrendous, sometimes sexualized images featuring the person they're attacking, simply to offend them, upset them, or harass them. On Instagram, you can go into audience, media, and tagging in settings. And for example, just allow tags from your followers, or you can stop them altogether. Something else to consider is what sorts of things you're notified about, as you're likely to click on your notifications. On X, for example, I don't get notifications from accounts which don't have a profile photo and who haven't confirmed their email address or their phone number. It's just a way of filtering out notifications from accounts which are wasting time or aren't real. And only people I follow can tag me in a photo. You can turn that off completely if you want to. And a totally essential setting, you may also want to make sure that location settings are off or that you don't use them. I certainly don't think anyone on social media ever needs to know exactly where I am while I'm there. I think being careful about exact locations is really sensible. So these decisions are absolutely key to making sure you're only contacted by the sorts of people that you're happy with, and that the platforms hold back the worst of what's out there when using your social media accounts, and that the platforms aren't telling other people where you are without realizing it, for example. It's worth checking from time to time to see whether any of your personal details are publicly available online, even if it's not you who has shared them. I recommend doing a search using inverted commas around your key personal information, which will create an exact search phrase. Look for information you might want to remain private, such as your phone numbers, your physical address, and your private email addresses. You'll usually get lots of results about the building that you live in coming up, which is often fine because they've been bought and sold over the years and they're listed in databases. But if your address is publicly linked to your name, for example, then you might want to try and get that changed. If you have a business registered to your home, you can re-register it to your accountant's premises, for example. As an example, ukphonebook.com came up with my husband's full name, our address, and our landline number when I put in his surname and Bristol, where we live, into its search. So it's data that's available via Companies House because he has a company registered here, but such data can also get out if you're not ex-directory, because your data gets out into the public realm via the electoral roll. Happily for me, I'm not in the same situation as him. I made myself ex-directory when I was a company director and registered the address to my accountants. So my available details are more than 10 years out of date, and you can consider being ex-directory too, if you want to. You can perform searches around your name, but I'd recommend doing so with caution, really, for anyone who has sort of got some public profile, because getting into that area can be a bit of a rabbit hole, as you know, you can't really control what people say about you, if that makes sense. If this is an area you're concerned about, it's worth noting that 192.com and public record search may bring up data about old addresses, etc., if that's an area you're interested in finding out about. But you need to pay to sign up and have accounts there, I think. The ways that your data can get out that I've just outlined are legitimate ways, really, but there are non-legitimate ways too, such as via data breaches. You can find out whether accounts registered. Oh, Rona, are you okay?
No, I just put a question into the chat. I was wondering what the phrase ex-directory meant and whether it was Apple or my phone service provider that I need to contact to become ex-directory, because I've never heard that phrase before.
Oh, okay. We're not very far away from pausing for questions. So shall we, if I finish this bit and then I'll answer your question, if that's okay. I'll make a note. So you can find out about whether accounts registered to your email addresses have been breached by putting your email addresses into this website. You can see online here, haveibeenpawned.com. It can also tell you about whether your unique passwords have been shared. If you find breaches, you can then log into those accounts and change the passwords to secure them again. If you find things that you don't want to be public, but which are out there online, you'll generally have to ask the host websites to remove it, which can be a slow process. So it's definitely worth doing kind of now, if you do find those things, so that you don't have to worry about those details getting out in the future if you were ever harassed online. So critically, you should never have to worry about people attacking you online, finding your real home address, which would be highly alarming for most people. I'm sorry to report that generally we leave a huge trail, a huge data trail behind us, and much of it is hoovered up by companies called data brokers and sold off. I know it's pretty horrible to hear. There are actually hundreds of these companies and they hold lots of information about individuals. But as we are covered by GDPR in the UK, you can ask the brokers to delete your data. So you go to this website, you can see here at the bottom, databrokerswatch.org, if you want to request that the top data brokers remove your data. I'm afraid you have to do it company by company, but at least you can do it. I am going to hand over to John for a moment, who is going to talk about passwords and security before we have a little meal, and then we'll pause for questions.
Thanks very much, Rowan. So thinking about more broadly how you make sure your online accounts are secure, it's a sad reality if you look at government data for 2025 that 43% of UK businesses and 30% of charities in the UK had a cybersecurity breach, so some sort of attack or data leak as a result of an attack. There are some simple things you can do to improve both your personal and, if you're in an organization, your organization's security. Hopefully, most of you have heard of two-factor authentication, where as well as your password and username, you're required to input a code of some sort in order to access your account. It can be a bit of an annoyance, but it's a great way of strengthening the security of the account. If the option is available, we recommend doing this using an authenticator app. So there are a range of free apps you can have on your phone that you add your accounts to them, they will generate the code. This is preferable to having a text message form of two-factor authentication, an SMS. And that's because it's possible for people to spoof your phone and intercept your SMS messages specifically to gain access to your account if they already have other data about you. So the Authenticator app is a more secure way of preventing that if the service offers it. In terms of passwords, if you're able to, we would recommend using a password manager. So most of the popular web browsers have a password manager built into them, or you can have a separate app, and a lot of them are free, which store your passwords and login details securely and allow you to synchronize them across devices. So if you're using a laptop and a mobile phone, or maybe another device as well, adding your password and login details to one device, it will be available on others. Most of these password managers have built-in password generators, which is a great way of generating strong and unique passwords. And because you're saving them, you don't have to remember them all. And that avoids the issue of using the same password multiple times across different sites. Because if you're hacked on one site, criminals will try using that same email and password combination on other sites. So having a unique password for every account is obviously impossible to personally remember, but is the strongest and safest approach. And that's where a password manager is really useful. Password managers are also great because if they're plugged into your web browser, they will detect if the site you're trying to log into is the site you think you are logging into. A lot of cyber security attacks are achieved by criminals presenting web pages that look like the official login page for Microsoft or Zoom or whatever, but are in fact fake, and they intercept your details at that point and potentially technically engineer that you feel like you've logged into your account and you are logged in, but they have also grabbed your password and username in the process. If you use a password manager and get it to prompt you with the passwords and the login details for each site, not only is that faster for you, you don't have to keep cutting and pasting or typing them in, but you can also be reassured that you're logging into the legitimate site. Another option instead of random passwords is to use key phrases. But again, if you're going to do that, while they can be secure and easy for you to remember, you need to resist the temptation to keep reusing the same key phrase across multiple user accounts. So those are some key tips to remember in terms of good password management and account security. Pass back to Rowan.
Thanks, John. It's also important to think about whether you're sharing information which can be put into a bigger picture, a bigger data picture, which bad actors could piece together in order to kind of create a targeted scam, or just use to try and hack your accounts. It sounds obvious, but do please be conscious of what you share and to who. I'm sure you all are already. But thinking about where you live, where you are, if you've left your house empty while you're on holiday, and information which may be included in photos, which shares data about you and your family, for example. These two children on screen here are not children that I know, but I know the little girl's name, that they're at a primary school in Northamptonshire, and I can see their school badge. And by following their mother on Instagram, who is an influencer, I get to know most of the things that they're up to, just as an example. So I'm careful about sharing things, including images about where I am when I'm not home, and ones which show my kids, for example, if we're on holiday. And I've taken care also of my Strava settings. I use Strava, the exercise tracking website, so I don't map my activity publicly. Add in that Facebook might be set up to tell people when your birthday is, for example. And maybe there's a publicly available email address or phone number for you. It's a lot of information about you right there for bad actors who are out there looking for personal data to go fishing with. So lots of people are clearly not thinking about Jigsaw information. You can also think about how networked your social media accounts are. For example, if you have some which are public and some which are private, you may not want people to be able to find all of your accounts if they find one of them. So to avoid this happening, think about, are all of your profile photos the same? Does it give away that they're all yours? You may also think about, are all of your social media accounts registered to one email address? And if that was hacked or you lost access by accident, would you lose access to all of your social media accounts? And remember too, of course, that you don't have to use your whole real name on all social platforms. You can use pseudonyms if you want to, in most cases. So this is the sort of vital work you can do to protect yourself from the worst of online harassment impacting your life. Happily, most of this information that I've gone through so far and that John's going to go through is shared in the Spaces Online Abuse Toolkit that you can see on screen here, which aims to help people working for arts organisations to protect themselves online. You can download it for free and we can share the link. We updated it last year and it's got loads of really useful information in it. You can see the contents are a bit similar to what we've covered. There's also other resources out there which you can go to if you ever need further support. So getsafeonline.org, lots of information about protecting yourself, cybersecurity, protecting your phone, your bank account. hopenotHate.org.uk is an organisation which focuses on supporting real life communities who are opposing extremism. And also the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, counterhate.com, is all about stopping the spread of online hate and mis or disinformation through research. I am going to pause as promised, and I'll stop sharing now. So we'll pause for questions. We've already had that one from Rona. I'll come back to you in just a second. And then when we've done questions, we've got time for a little comfort break. So Rona, do you want to repeat your question? It was about X Directory, wasn't it? You're on mute, Rona.
Yes, it was about what X Directory actually means and whether I need to go through Apple or through my internet service provider to become X Directory, because it's not a phrase I've come across before.
Is it not? It's a phrase I used to hear a lot in life, but I don't hear it so much anymore. The way I understand it is that it's just where your details are not listed in the phone book. So I guess it's really an old term about landline data. You can call your landline provider to ask not to be listed. You can also call your your mobile phone provider to ask not to be listed. And if you want to be opt out of the public electoral register, you can go to the government website, which is gov.uk.
I've just put that link to the government site.
So,
in the
sorry,
chat.
so let's just confirm. She said my mobile phone provider, so not the people who created the phone, not the Apple, but the actual service provider. Because I'm actually on a train and your voice is slightly distorted.
So, for example, Vodafone, EE, the people who send you the bill.
Thank you.
And I put the electoral register link in the chat. There's a question, Rowan, if you scroll up the chat, there's a question about geolocation and impact on algorithm, which I think is going to be your expertise. Terry, and hopefully I pronounce your name right, has a question: what do you do if a collaborator is trying to harm your project and trying to steal your authorship, publishes on Instagram defamatory information about you? How do you make them take the post down? In the second half of the presentation, I will talk about the reporting methods to the platforms, which is a possible approach to that. If you have control over comments, you have the option to delete, but understand you might not necessarily have that, but we will do a little bit of detail on that. Sam Allen has a question about using Google Share folders. Is there any recommended security additions we should add there to protect client files? I don't use the Google platform a lot, but I think you can limit sharing to particular individuals with login rather than generating an open link, so that is more secure. I think the other thing people often forget to do is to take data down after a project has finished. So if you're sharing folders with collaborators, often the risks can come from just having that information lingering there long term. And then if your account was hacked or jeopardized, you lose all of that data. Whereas if you, after a project finishes, remove that data, stop the sharing, you've got a more secure setup. And obviously do look at having two-factor authentication on your accounts. Lila, again, sorry if I've mispronounced your name. You have a question about password safety. Do you want to ask that?
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hi, yeah. Where you talked about password safety, you mentioned using like a browser to store them or an app. What about if it's like multiple people in the team that are using passwords?
Yeah, so two things on that. In a perfect world, obviously, have different users having different login details, but I appreciate for software licensing costs, it's sometimes people are sharing logins, or if people are managing one social media account, you need to share. A lot of the password managers aimed at businesses have a secure sharing facility built in. You may have to pay a subscription for that kind of service. We use 1Password at the Space, and that allows us to have a vault for the marketing team so they can see passwords, and a separate vault for the finance team, and so on. So a commercial password management software, which doesn't cost very much, will have that feature in it. And then you can share passwords. You can even give people access to a password where they don't know what the password is, so they can log in. The password is obviously asterisked out when they log in. They don't necessarily even see the password. If they leave the company and you disable the access to the password manager, then I would still say you should reset the password, but it reduces the risk of people taking the password away with them. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Shall I have a stab at the geolocation question? I think it's from Daniela. I believe that if you turn off geolocation, that some of the platforms don't like that algorithmically. I think what they are referring to is the platform seeing your IP address, which isn't necessarily the same as the platform sharing it publicly. If it's something that you're worried about, then I would recommend doing it from, I guess if you're posting from home, then that can be a worry. And I would have to research more about the impact of that, how other people could find it. But it shouldn't be publicly available just because the platform can see your IP address. But obviously, if you have another place of work, for example, then posting, so for example, John at the Space, they should be from an office, they'd have a more, a more anonymous IP address, for example, if that does make sense. I have to say that's quite deep into cybersecurity concerns. So other people may have other experiences to share as well, because you all have your experiences in this area too.
Thank you so much, Rowan. That was actually really helpful. And my main concern was really just how turning off the location would impact our content and how it gets pushed out to our audiences, to just like, yeah, if there will be an impact on that. And it sounds like there potentially would be, but also there is like the cybersecurity part of it as well. So yeah, thank you.
Should we take a screen break now then? So if we can take a break for 5 minutes, so we'll come back at a couple of minutes past 3 for the last half hour, if that's okay. So see you all in 5 minutes.
Thank you, John and Rowan.
Okay, it's back. Right. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you've had a chance to step away from the screen, albeit briefly. I'm just going to share my slides and take over for the second half. Rowan, is that displaying okay? Can you give me a thumbs up? Great. So in this second half, I'm going to talk a little bit about advice for organizations, and then move on to what to do if you do unfortunately encounter online abuse. And in thinking about organizations, even if you're a sole practitioner, some of this advice may also be relevant in terms of how you prepare. So first of all, it's about thinking if colleagues in your wider team feels confident in this area, and a lot of this is about having conversations in advance, but also if people are moderating abusive content online, even for experienced social media managers, that can become wearing. And we found it's just helpful if people sit down from time to time, talk through what they're finding, whether the organization's approach to dealing with content moderation is working, whether there are cases where people are not really sure what they should be moderating or responding to. And just having those group discussions and sharing the challenges can be a really useful way of lowering the stress and making people feel a little less isolated. If you were running an event, you would think about risk assessments in the physical world, trip hazards, and so on. Rowan and I have been struck that organizations don't include social media in their risk assessments. So if you know that your project is possibly about a controversial theme where you might encounter abuse, or an artist might be particularly vulnerable to abuse, then considering in advance the risks and what you could do is a really useful step. Also, to think ahead, what if something goes wrong? So what if your social media account is hacked, or you lose access to email in terms of communicating, or an issue blows up over the weekend when there's no one on your team keeping an eye on social media? How do you monitor? How might you respond? Do you have a WhatsApp group or an alternative way of quickly communicating and making decisions if you're out of the office or you haven't got access to your usual way of doing so? And then, in addition to making sure your team are well supported, thinking about whether there are people who, for particular reasons, might be more likely to be targeted. Rowan mentioned right at the beginning about, unfortunately, diverse characteristics, possibly increasing risk levels. So if you've got people who are high profile, maybe they are providing commentary on videos that you're putting on social media, so they're appearing on screen, then again, thinking about whether there are additional protections you need to put around them. Also thinking about whether in the content you publish, there might be ways of slightly modifying it that reduce the risk. So for example, we worked with an organization that was featuring ethnically diverse people in its adverts very prominently, And in the screens that appear in a video before you start playing the video, the actual focus of that video content was about historical themes. And so the suggestion that maybe the first screen that you see is different and is less likely to trigger the trolls, we'll come to the trolls in a minute, is a possible editorial decision that means that the people who watch that video are really interested in the historical content and engage with that. And the people who are just looking for people to abuse and casually scrolling through social media are more likely to move on and find other targets. Obviously, those kind of editorial strategies need very careful thought about your values and your approach and your attitude towards your own freedom of speech. But on a practical level, we do know that they reduce the level of online attacks. And also thinking about what kind of spaces you want your social media accounts to be. So quite a few organizations we've worked with, we've developed online statements that they publish on their website about how they want their social media comment threads to feel, opportunities for constructive discussion or for education or whatever. And then to have a list of rules that if people break, they might find that you moderate their post. And having that as a published statement means that if an argument breaks out in a comment thread, you can include a link to that statement, and that gives you clear and transparent grounds for moderating comments which are breaching your house rules. You can then reflect that in your own internal approach to moderation. And if you're an organization doing a lot of content moderation, we recommend having clear policies and guidelines to help the moderators make their decisions. You can also set up alerts through your social media software and other means, so you will get notified if there is a sudden outburst of negative commentary about your organization. Here's just a screenshot of sample house rules, a lot of detail here. We will share these slides later, but essentially just very clearly describing in this example the kind of content that isn't acceptable, as a way of making moderators have a basis for a decision, but also sharing potentially in a summary format to the public to say what isn't allowed on your social channels. If you know you've got a project where there's an increased risk of negativity on social media, and this applies equally if you're an individual artist working on a project, you might want to think about whether you temporarily lock down your social media accounts or disable comments on specific posts, what you could do just to reduce that risk. And then once those messages and that profile that's a little less high profile after the project has ended, then you can revert to your normal settings. So the idea of just temporarily increasing the protection levels and reducing your visibility and then reverting to normal afterwards. If you do receive abuse, then the first thing we would say is make sure you have support around you. So if you're an individual, that might be about friends. If you're in a workplace, about ensuring there are colleagues who are aware of what's happening and you're not trying to just deal with it on your own. Sorry. So also, if you've got negative commentary going on, make sure you take screenshots of it, because there's a chance if you do decide to report it that the perpetrator has already deleted the evidence, and then you have a less strong case. But if you can grab a screenshot, make a copy, then you'll be in a much stronger position. And then you do have choice and take a breathing space to decide if and how you would like to respond. So an option for responding is to report to the platforms. Now, sadly, in the last few years, the level of support they provide in responding to stuff has generally declined, but we still feel it's worth reporting. It keeps it on their radar, and if it's a particularly bad example, then they may respond, whereas if you don't report at all, there's no chance of that happening. They all have a very similar approach to doing this. So normally in the ... that you find typically in the upper right-hand corner of a post, you will get an option to report. and normally a set of categories. Someone was asking earlier in the chat about an intellectual property infringement. So LinkedIn, for example, has a specific category for that. So you can make your report there. On the broad question of whether or not to respond, the Centre for Countering Digital Hate has a really interesting piece of research on this called Don't Feed the Trolls. And that looks at the psychology of why certain groups of people are deliberately trying to provoke and abuse online in order to encourage an argument, really often for their own pleasure. And the question is, if in responding to them and responding to those comments, you are playing into their hands or not. So some people feel the best thing to do is just to ignore the trolls and not feed the fire, and others to engage. An example of someone who likes to engage is Mary Beard, the historian. And there's a little quote from her there, but effectively it's the ethos of not wanting the bullies to be in charge of the playground. But even if you are engaging, our advice is not to do so angrily in the heat of the moment, to respond. Maybe for a lot of organisations we work with, for museums, it might be about clarifying the facts, so to respond neutrally and factually, and try and avoid being pulled into a to and fro. So maybe respond once, and then if the abuse continues, moderate that and or just ignore. You will have sent a message that you are active, you're engaging, you're willing to have a constructive conversation, but you're not being pulled into the trolls arguing. So those are a summary of those responses. You can ignore and not respond. You can mute and delete and moderate the comments. You can choose to engage. But the thing I would really emphasize above all is make sure you are taking care of yourself and you have support and you aren't coming to undue harm in trying to tackle this without support around you. Here are some more links to resources that might be useful in this context, both in terms of specifically online harassment, but more generally in terms of crime or being victims of abuse more broadly, and the mental health challenges that that might lead to. So there's a wealth of resources out there to help think through and deal with those problems. And again, we'll share these afterwards. And in thinking of who to tell, as I mentioned earlier, it could be a manager or colleagues in your organisation, friends and family. I know of people who ask friends to look at their social media posts and read them first and just summarise to them if there's anything contentious. So you're not suffering the pain of having to read negative comments directly about yourself, and they can explain it to you and you can decide if and how you might want to respond or just move on. A couple more links there of where you can get help. And then finally, and Rowan and I always comment that ending presentation on these topics of the extreme end feels a bit negative, but it's important for people to know where the law kicks in. So there's a slice of online abuse that falls within the definition of stalking and harassment. And so I put up the legal summary of what harassment includes, which is including abusive text messages or images, abusive messages on social media, as well as real world physical abuse and abuse through phone calls. So the broad rule applies that Rowan mentioned at the beginning, which is if it's illegal in person, then it's also illegal online. And there are a couple of options there in terms of reporting. And then online stalking or harassment, specific definition around that. I won't read all of this out, but you can see the flavour, some of the things we talked about, but other more egregious and more personally targeted issues, such as stealing someone's identity or more sort of coercive and controlling things that people might find in intimate relationships. But again, if those behaviours are a pattern, and it says here 2 times or more, and it's causing you to feel scared, distressed or threatened, then that is reportable. We have the link at the bottom on the Police UK website for that. And you have the option to report online, as well as calling 101 or going in person to a police station to report. So obviously that's at the extreme end, but before that, hopefully we've provided some practical advice. We do offer, we've mentioned our work for organisations, so we do offer tailored support in terms of developing policies and processes, providing training to staff like this. So if you're interested in a more bespoke approach or more detailed advice, do please get in touch. And just finally, to recap, think about your social media settings, a lot of flexibility in what Rowan's described to pick what's the right mix for you of personal and private, how visible you want to be, and how much of other people's content you want to see. Think about that separation between your work accounts and your personal accounts potentially. Do some structured searching on what of your details might have been shared online. I particularly recommend the checking if any of your passwords have been compromised. If you regularly use the same password, that can be a bit of a wake-up call to know that it's out there on the dark web as data that people can purchase linked to your email address. You can go through that process of having data removed from the data brokers and so on. And then to reiterate, if you are suffering online abuse, make sure you get help, use some of the resources, decide if you want to respond and how, and do that thoughtfully and when you've got space to properly consider it, and definitely report if you're encountering extreme or repeated examples, and consider if those are verging into criminal territory. But above all, look after yourself and your colleagues first and foremost. So thank you very much for your time, and we have a little bit of time, if I've timed it right, for any further questions. I don't know if there's been anything in the chat while I've been spouting.
May I ask something?
Yeah.
So because I mean, everything that you have shared, and I hope you shared the presentation, it's really like helpful in kind of like general terms. But I recently had with a project that someone published defamatory information on Instagram about me, and without any source, and then she wrote to two professional contacts in two different countries against me. And then she also wrote another email to another organization claiming expenses. So one organization didn't reply her email because it had no legal base and it was just malicious. With the other two, I had like personal meetings, and they said that I didn't have to worry, that they were continuing to work with me. But my concern is that there's this Instagram post that's still online against me, and I did report it on Instagram, but actually it hasn't been taken because she didn't tag me. She put my name but didn't tag me, so I don't know how I could get that post off.
When you reported it to Instagram, did you make it really clear that it was about you?
I can remember well because the system of reporting was kind of like very general. So I didn't have an option to kind of like write down why I was reporting.
My experience is that the platforms do care more if a piece of content is reported by the person who features in the content, or if the content is like about you, for example. So I'm not aware that being tagged necessarily makes a difference, but I do believe that if you are the person suffering, then they're more likely.
No, the only thing that happens is that I cannot see the post from my account, but it's still open to the public from other accounts.
So that seems as though the author of the post,
Hmm?
I'm trying to think how they would do that. In some platforms on Facebook, you can hide from the person who's written it, but you can't. I don't know if you can do that on Instagram. I think the best thing. Have you actually tried to get in contact with Instagram through another route?
I would not know how to get in touch through another route.
I think if you search for kind of contact Instagram, I'm going to start doing it while I'm speaking. Then trying to get in touch with them through another route is probably the best way if you found that you weren't able to articulate your problem fully through their reporting system. I'll have a look while we're talking and see if I can post something in the comments.
Thanks.
While you're doing that, I noticed a question from Liberty. Someone mentioned a similar point on IP addresses. What is the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of a VPN, a virtual private network, for cybersecurity? So that's a huge topic. There are two main things that you are getting if you use a VPN. So that's a piece of software that you put on your computer or on your mobile phone, and that routes all your internet traffic, email, web browsing, any data that's going from your computer or your phone out onto the internet via the servers of the VPN provider, which are usually spread all over the world. So you can connect to a servers in a foreign country, so you can effectively mask your location, which people often nefariously use to circumvent geo-blocking on content, to access content overseas that they may not have a license to or whatever, but you can effectively use it to mask your location. But more importantly for cybersecurity, it's encrypting the data flow that you are sending and receiving over the internet. And a really useful example is if you travel a lot for work and you are connecting to public Wi-Fi to do your work, doing that using a VPN will reassure you that if you connect accidentally to an illegitimate network, your data is not being compromised. So there are people who sit out there and use technology, use hardware to pretend to be the airport Wi-Fi, and unsuspecting users come along, connect to the free airport Wi-Fi, are in fact having all their data intercepted. Using a VPN protects you against that risk. So hopefully that 2-minute summary is useful, but if Liberty, okay, that's good. Lovely.
I think I managed to find the form for reporting defamatory content on Instagram. So sorry, Terry, I hope I've pronounced your name properly. You can try that, I think, as your next port of call. Fingers crossed that it works for you. But I think if you, in the information, if you say this is part of a kind of concerted harassment campaign, which is how it sounds, that's what you're describing to me, then, you know, make sure that you include those other things as well in your, because there's like a free text box on that page, so hopefully you can say what you need to.
Thank you.
Well, I hope it works.
Sorry, cut across. In answer to Ella's question, she says, I like the social media community guidelines you have shared. Have you got a template we could use, work from by any chance? So I will put a link now for the Historic Royal Palaces social media moderation policy. So that gives their public facing guidelines. So you can see what they're talking about. They're very good, I can say, because Rowan helped write them. So what sits behind that is a much more detailed document that they use for moderation, and those documents are very tailored to an organization and their particular approach. So if you're interested in one of those for your organization, happy to have a conversation, but those documents are obviously not shared publicly. Were there any other questions we've missed? Sam noting she has a lot to do. When I first saw Rowan's content on some of this, it's like, yes, I have a lot to do as well. and it always develops. These things are always changing. So it's a thing to keep an eye on.
Every time we talk about this, I think, okay, I'm going to go back on and double check, because that's the data breaches and things like that mean that it's never quite static.
And Lila's saying you have some thoughts. Are those thoughts you want to share?
Hello. Yes, it's been really, it's been really useful. And did you say you were going to share the slides of all the information?
Yes.
That'd be really good because I'd like to share it with my team. It does feel like we have a lot of work to do, which is a little bit overwhelming. Just so you know, like where I work, we work for a library and archive, and we specifically collect histories of global majority communities. So everything that we share online is histories to do with people from a range of backgrounds and communities and faiths. And majority of our team we identify as like global majority led, sort of majority women, non-white. So we've had experiences of staff having some, personal issues online, and then we've had sort of online hate, I'd say, directed at certain things that we've shared about histories, really. And it just seems to be getting more and more recurrent, I'd say. It's in the last year or so, and we're receiving more sort of negative interactions with the public in our actual physical space as well, which has led to obviously some staff feeling quite uncomfortable at work. So we're actually only discussing this a couple of weeks ago of having some sort of visible statement in the library space about, like you were saying before, what sort of, interactions are acceptable, what we are willing to sort of discuss, and people come in and just sort of like deny something in the past has happened, or say things like, oh, well, what about why you're not centering sort of white British history? And it's obvious that we're centering these histories because they're marginalized. So I don't really have a question. It's just more of my thoughts and sort of the context of our organization and the team, really.
Yeah, and those very interesting reflections. And we've done some work with public libraries and also the work we do with museums, where you've got that combination of an online presence and an in-person presence, and people showing up in venue as well as people showing up online, and how you manage that. But all of the issues you've mentioned are sadly familiar issues, and the complexities of navigating them. And not to sell ourselves too much, but we do a sort of in the course of a day, we can do a thing where we can walk you through, give you a basic process, look at how you work. So if that's something you're interested in, do reach out. But yeah, those particular issues around those sort of public spaces and those particular collections, or the sort of narratives you want to put around them and having those challenged, are unfortunately increasingly prevalent. We've just got a couple of minutes and a couple of questions. I think one, Holly's asking about tips on how best to calm down when you're attacked online. Neither Rowan nor I are psychologists, but generally the advice of having people around you, stepping back from the screen and taking a break and not being drawn into the to and fro, is absolutely crucial. I found reading that the Don't Feed the Trolls report really helped me understand the sadly broken psychology of the people on the other side of these comments, and that it's not about you, it's about their dysfunction, and that's why you're seeing this. So I found that helpful in just emotionally separating myself from some of these things. But as you say, it is a physiological thing, and so in the moment it's trying to break that pattern, step back, get some support around you, talk to other people, and realize that this isn't personal, it is tragically normal.
Never reply when you've been drinking, if you should drink.
Yes, don't reply in the heat of the moment is the thing. And we are at past. Sorry, Ella. I don't know if that was a comment. Yeah, hopefully that covers try and engage factually, not in the heat of the moment. Sorry, it was we've slightly run out of time. Kate, I'm going to pass back to you if that's all right.
Yes, thank you so much. I'll put my face up if I can. Thank you so much, Rowan, and for John, for this afternoon's kind of really, really useful and step-by-step practical session on how to respond, but what is kind of online abuse, and how it presents itself. I've taken so many notes. Things that you never even thought about initially, that would really encompass, day-to-day issues. So thank you. I've got a quick, for those there, a very quick survey. I would love if we could just take a minute to do. I'm just going to put it on, so for those of you able to do it. I'm a bit responding. Yeah, there you go. It's on. And for everyone that attended, thank you for coming along to the session. We hope you found it useful. Please feel free to feedback in the comments, in the survey, or to us outside of the session. And we have more sessions online to book, so please feel free to book those. I think the next one's on the 11th of March, which is community ownership. We're looking at the private purchase or the asset transfer of buildings to community cultural organisations. And we have an open space event coming up too. So thank you. And can I extend our thanks as well? Thank you very much, Lucy. She's just putting in the chat, so you can just click the link to our events page. And can I also extend our thanks to our two brilliant BSL interpreters, and that's Naomi and Isabel. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'll leave the survey running for those just to populate a few pieces of information. And thank you as well, I was going to say, for John and Rowan. And you've put the link in for your toolkit, how to respond to online abuse. We've also attached that to our Let's Create Peer Learning website in terms of resources, so you can access that there. And again, in response to sharing slides, we can share slides, and we'll also attach those again as a resource on our website. Thank you, everybody. And have a fantastic rest of the afternoon.
Thanks so much, guys. Great to
Thank
see you all.